How do you then set out to design this API?
It's a great question. I think one thing that comes to mind is I think we actually had a lot of empathy as a company because we were utilizing other data services and like provider data solutions before we built what is now Ribbon Health. And so I think, in having built healthcare applications ourselves, a lot of things we wish we wanted uh, in an API that would help us build the solution we were building kind of guided some of our initial product development. Um, and so that was kind of like where we started, right?
Right. So I imagine a lot of people, when they're designing an API, they would need to talk to potential customers because they might not actually have firsthand experience of what the API they would need. Like, so you have this idea, you're like, okay, I have this idea for an API, but without having actually needed that API yourself, you might need to talk to different prospective users. But in your case, you had already built a user interface that would love to have had the API that you built that you later built.
Yes.
So you could you could just imagine, you're like, well, what would I love to have? Okay, I'd love to have X and Y and Z. And then you kind of prioritize those features and you're like, okay, what can I get to market relatively quickly that I can start selling? That's not going to be the biggest possible lift. So you kind of prioritize um, features in that way, and then you just start building them and releasing them.
Yep, exactly. And actually, and we certainly had a lot to learn from what our customers needed besides just our own experience. And
Sure,
actually,
sure, sure.
there was a really interesting thing we did kind of by organic happenstance. So, as we talked about earlier in this podcast, we were this care navigation service before. And so both my co-founder and I actually had backgrounds in like data startups. And so we were very naturally building this backend infrastructure. And then other healthcare companies came to us and said, hey, where do you guys get your doctor data? It looks pretty good. Like, can we access it? Do you guys have an API? Can we tap into this data? And so we started kind of feeling this very strong pull. And, so we had all of this backend internal like endpoints that we were using for ourselves. And not all of them were ready to be exposed necessarily with the full investment infrastructure, ready and available to be fully productized. And so actually what we did is in our documentation, we sort of wrote down all the theoretical endpoints so we could either were already live or like could be built within 24 to 48 hours. And we had a status on the documentation that said like, live for the endpoints that were actually truly live in the API. And then another status that was like, contact us to learn more, right? And through that that experimentation, we got a lot of strong market signal of like which endpoints were resonating with customers and where we should invest in developing. And so we could really kind of align our development efforts with what customers were explicitly asking for. Once they saw, they're like, "Oh, I want that!" Like, yes, like, where is it? Why can't I access it? I want it now. And that would really help us, have empathy for the end user.
Nice. Very cool. All right. So, in your answer to my last question, Nate, you alluded to your background. And so, I've got a question for you related to that. So, you've worked extensively in business analytics at companies like McKinsey, Microsoft, and Unified. Did you encounter a lot of incorrect and missing data in those experiences as well? And so, how, if so, has your experience with those kinds of business analytics situations helped you on your journey to co-founding Ribbon?
It's a very interesting question. I think so at Microsoft, I was working on what was called like the Windows scorecard, which is a really interesting KPI dashboard the executives there use to understand the state of their business. So what's our market share in Internet Explorer or for service tablets or like what have you. And you can imagine for a scorecard like that, you have tons and tons of different sources, right? That you have to aggregate and centralize in one place. That's one thing. And then also Unified. Unified was this amazing company that works on sort of like the marketing supply chain of ad tech. So how does a CMO understand their hundreds of millions of dollars of ad spend across Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook and Google, et cetera? It's actually really hard to answer that question because the data is very fragmented across many different silos, right?
So you can kind of see where you're going.
You can see these different parallels. So I think the things I had learned there was actually sort of the importance and the power and the value of bringing data together in one centralized place, because it's really, really, really challenging to do so. And then also, how do you make a sense of the signal from the noise, right? What are the principles of which, the data is accurate and actually matters? And how do you design the systems to employ strong analytics and etc. to like take action with that data and have it actually be useful. So I think those are probably the things I picked up and applied that are relevant to ribbon health.